We love an impressive building on the Antiques Roadshow, and this has to be one of Northern Ireland's finest. Today we're back at the Parliament Buildings in Stormont Estate in Belfast. There are fantastic views of the capital from here. Over there behind the trees is where the Titanic was constructed before it set sail in 1912. And down here behind me is Prince of Wales Avenue. It's where the crew is setting up, or more commonly known as the Mile, because that's how far it is from the gate to the front steps. Finished in 1932 for the newly formed government, the layout is modelled on the UK Parliament in Westminster. I love the symbolism attached to the building by the architect Arnold Thornley. For example, it's 365 feet wide, to represent, of course, the number of days in a year. And the 6 pillars at the front of the building and in the 2 chambers are thought to represent the 6 counties that make up Northern Ireland. The arabesques in the Senate chamber symbolise the 3 main industries of the time: linen, shipbuilding and agriculture. This building also has one extra ceiling. Since the building was first opened in 1932, the paintwork has never needed a touch-up, and the colours have remained this vibrant even after being covered in soot when the assembly chamber caught fire in the 90s. It's all down to a special wax that was used to coat the paint to repel dust. Unfortunately, the secret formula went to the grave with its inventor, which is such a shame because it's really rather brilliant. We could all do with a bit of this on our paintwork at home, couldn't we? Another interesting formula was used to safeguard Parliament buildings from bomb attacks during the Second World War. The RAF used this chamber as a war operations room, so they disguised the bright white exterior of the building with bitumen and, would you believe it, cow manure to protect it from air attacks. And it must have worked, because even though the building is just 4 miles from the heavily bombed city centre and the shipyard, it was never hit. We're not trying to cover up anything today, though. We want to unmask some of the mysteries of the items brought in by the people of Belfast and beyond to this week's Antiques Roadshow.
Quite often when people turn up to my table on a roadshow, as they unwrap their item, they said to me, this, I said, as you might remember, when people say that, quite often that's not true. And you, sir, said, no, it really isn't worth anything. Why did you draw that conclusion?
Well, I didn't know whether it was silver,
okay,
and it wasn't hallmarked.
Right. Oh, you're quite right. It's not hallmarked. It is, in fact, electroplate. It's not silver.
Right.
It's electroplated copper.
Right.
How did you come by it?
I visited this old lady I had known some years previously when she was a nurse and she was retiring and I was a young kid on the block, and you know, we got quite friendly and then didn't see or hear from her for years, and then suddenly I met her and started visiting her, and she said one day to me when she really wasn't all that well, you know, I would like you to have this, you know. And I looked
that was
at it.
40 years ago.
I looked at it and thought, well, you know, if you insist, sort of thing. But anyway, we went home and put it away.
I was going to say, does it hold enormous sentimental value to you? But
Sorry.
Not really.
No.
So you've housed it all these years,
yes,
and not really loved it.
No, I don't even know what to use it for.
Okay, well, it's made by a man called Charles Ashby, who started an arts and crafts guild called the Guild of Handicrafts Limited. And some of their work in silver is ferociously valuable and terribly, terribly sought after. They went out of business in about 1909, so we can date this to somewhere between about 1900 and 1909. And it doesn't really do very much, it's just simply a dish. And if I take the lid off here, you'll see on the inside, you can see that it's been made with a hammer, and it's not been made by a machine. That was the great thing about the Guild of Handicrafts. It was all about handicrafts. They were wanting to get away from industrial production and make things beautiful by hand, and that's what this is all about. This is the essence of this dish. It's a handmade item.
Yes.
It is electroplate, as I said, except for this little finial, which is silver, and it's got a little semi-precious cabochon stone in the top to make it look pretty. Because it's made by the Guild of Handicrafts, and because it's one of the sort of, if you like, an icon of arts and crafts silver, people like to collect them. So your little dish, which holds no sentimental value, which has been hiding in the back of the cupboard for the last 40 years, ill-considered. Well, hopefully this will make you feel a bit better. If you wanted to go and buy a dish like that, it would cost you about £2,000.
Oh my God.
My goodness.
Do you know anybody wants to buy?
Where do these greyhounds live in your home?
Those greyhounds stay on my mantelpiece at home, and anytime we move house, the family know that I'm in residence because the dogs are in the mantelpiece.
So like the Queen flies her flag,
Yeah,
when these are on the mantel shelf, you're home.
I'm in residence, yes.
Well, the mantelpiece is exactly where they've been, because these are mantelpiece ornaments made in Staffordshire. They're known generically as Staffordshire figures.
Right.
These are 19th century, but to somebody buying them in the 19th century, it's the equivalent of following a celebrity on social media. So if you wanted to get close to a celebrity, you would buy a Staffordshire figure and you
Okay.
put it on your mantelpiece.
Okay.
And of course this, Mr. McGrath, is one of the most famous greyhounds there was. He met the Queen. Queen Victoria wanted to meet him. And
Right.
do you know why he was famous?
He won the Waterloo Cup
He won
three
it
times.
3 times,
Yeah.
and he was the first dog in history to do that. In 1868
Yeah.
and 1869. In the 1870 race, everybody thought he would win, and he actually fell into a frozen river
Right.
and was almost drowned, but rescued by another dog. So he didn't win that year. So
Okay.
the following year, when the aptly named Pretender, he won, and that was his
Right.
third victory. So these would have been bought by somebody who was at that race to say, I was there. It's a bit like,
Yeah.
you bought a commemorative badge.
Souvenir.
Exactly. So they would have come home and they would have been proudly placed, because this was
The champion.
the Kardashian of dogs. It was so famous. He's still very famous in Lurgan, isn't he?
Yes, we have a statue in the High Street in Lurgan. It was only erected a few years ago. And Brownlow House, they think his remains are there. And as a child, I remember you bought a tin of dog food called Master McGrath. And it has been said that if you fed your dog on Master McGrath dog food, the chances are he'd be a winner.
Whoever made the dog food and called him up was onto a clever thing. So the most famous greyhound in the world at the time, and the Pretender who he beat. Staffordshire figures have gone back in value of late, but because of the greyhound interest and because it is Master McGrath and Pretender, I think a pair of these today to a collector will be between £1,000 and £1,500.
Right. Okay.
Does that change how you feel about them?
Yes.
But they'll always be
Do.
home.
They'll always be home and in the family.
Which for me I regard as extremely pretty. It's a ring set with a line of white stones all the way round. Family ring.
It's called the Elizabeth ring, and it's been handed down to everyone with the name Elizabeth in my family over the past few generations.
Are you Elizabeth as
My
well?
middle name is Elizabeth, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. Why is it called that then? What's the particular
Well,
reason?
my late aunt told me that it had originally come from Queen Elizabeth I, but I have no evidence of that.
Or what made her think that?
Well, she thought that somebody had done something favourable for her and that it was given as a gift.
So would we like this ring to be a 16th century ring?
I'm hoping it might be.
All right, okay. It's set with a line of graduated stones. They're diamonds, cushion-shaped diamonds, set in silver. If I turn it upside down, come and have a look at this. You see the setting there at the back, fully closed in at the back. And the point I want to make here, can you see the hoop? Those groove lines?
Yes.
That's called a reeded gold hoop. You hope it does to Elizabeth I. And we could track it back with definite provenance. We would be looking at an extremely serious piece of jewellery. But it's not. No. And the reason that it's not is that I can tell you with some confidence that they didn't make rings like that in the 16th century. They
think so.
didn't look
I
like
don't
that.
think so.
The diamonds, for instance, you see the way that they sparkle? They're Georgian.
Oh, okay.
They're graduated Georgian cut diamonds. This is made in 1795 to the first 5 or 10 years of the 19th century. It's absolutely square in the middle, Georgian. Is that disappointing?
I'm just happy to get some information on it.
It's a bit disappointing, isn't it, really?
Well,
I mean,
the story's a good one.
Well, OK, so let's move on to the question of value, because notwithstanding the fact it's not anything to do with the 16th century, it's a really smart ring. And it's very desirable. And if you want to know what everyone likes at the moment, it's Georgian diamond jewellery. Okay. And there's another thing, it's very wearable. Yes. You know, you can put that on, it sparkles, it looks terrific. Yeah. So I think it would make between £4,000 and £5,000. Come.
Thank you very much.
This is the most lovely drawing by Dame Laura Knight, and I see it's inscribed "With love to Jean Bryden" from Laura Knight. So is this connected with you?
Yes, this is my mother.
I see there's a likeness.
Yeah, so believed.
So when was this done?
This was done in Coventry in 1942 when my mother worked in the balloon site.
How interesting, because Laura Knight was one of the official war artists, and she did a very famous picture of the barrage balloons going up. She did a lot of studies, you know, of people in the Second World War working in the armaments factory, and she obviously knew your mother a little bit.
My mother was a sergeant and was responsible for showing Laura Knight round the site. And before she left, she called her in and asked her to sit for her, and that took about 5 minutes. And a week later, this arrived in the camp for her, and it was to thank her for all her help.
That is so nice. Do you know, there are a lot of fake Laura Knight drawings around that I see, and when you see something like this, the quality of the line in here and the line in her face, it's just beautifully done. Laura Knight has done a lot of the drawings I've seen by her.
Is it?
So she took a lot of trouble to do this for your mother. So what's this worth? I mean, I think this is worth £2,000 to £3,000.
What? No way.
Not bad for 5 minutes work.
Really?
Yeah, I think it's fabulous.
She wasn't materialistic, but she loved that. She loved that.
Lovely set of teaspoons.
They belonged to my mother, and they were given to her from an aunt in the south of Ireland. So,
from 100 yards you can tell these are Irish silver. Don't even need to look at the hallmarks. They are classic bit of Irish decoration. You see these stars here? Irish bright stars, they call those. They only crop up on Irish silver. These are going to be made in Dublin in the late 18th century. People like Irish silver. They're worth £200, maybe £250 on a good day.
I do use them.
You got this, isn't it?
Yeah.
When did you get it?
It was handed down through the family at my great. Yes, with a glass, many a time.
Oh no! And that's what's going on here.
Right.
This young lady with her broom must be the maid.
Yes.
And
right.
one has a horrible feeling that the gentleman with the extravagant sideburns is probably the master of the house, and that this is his wife.
That's correct.
And that's why this is an awkward interruption.
Right.
This is a fairing, sold in the 19th century as a sort of joke. But there is a warning. If you listen at doors, you may lose your head.
Yes,
and
yes.
Unfortunately, she has.
She has, yes. Long time ago.
A few years ago, one of these very rare fairings would have fetched around £500. She's lost her head. The market's gone down. £50.
Right.
But it's still very funny.
It doesn't matter. That end doesn't matter.
We see some really, really pretty things on the Antiques Roadshow, but this is one of the prettiest things I've seen for a long time. Absolutely beautiful. And what's fantastic about it is that it says exactly what it is, who made it, when, and where. Wrote in the year of 1800 by William Ritchie of County Tyrone. Now, how did you come to have it?
Well, it was in the belongings of the cousin of my grandmother, and my aunts went to tidy up her affairs, and it was just in a collection of photos and letters and things that she left behind.
And what do you think it is?
Well, we have a bit of a theory that we think it's a church choir book that children would use to learn the tunes of the Psalms, but they would use alternative words because they weren't supposed to use the correct words except on a Sunday. But we're not sure.
Okay. I kind of think it's more of a love token.
Okay.
I think that this William Ritchie produced it for Mary Beattie, and he's trying to woo her, because a lot of the songs in it are about lads and lasses and love. And then there's this lovely picture of this man and woman, and the man appears to be carrying a Valentine card in his hand, and he's got a rose in another hand, and there's this lady here who he's obviously chasing after. And as you go through it, there's all of these things about what happens with love. I think it's actually completely secular. I don't think it's religious at all.
Shows what we know, I suppose. Yeah, we didn't have any idea, really.
Well, the thing is, these things are always a sort of discovery, and mine is only a theory. And it's absolutely full of wonderful coloured pictures of all sorts of things. Just an absolutely stunning piece of folk art, in fact. You know, this is naive art from 1800, and things like this just don't really survive.
It is remarkable. That was what struck me about it, was that, you know, it's clearly a piece of homemade artwork that survived over 200 years. So just found it remarkable, really, and curious.
You know, it's not in great condition. It's got some wear and tear. But it's an absolute stunner. I think that if you were to put it into auction, I think you'd be expecting it to make maybe as much as £4,000.
Really? I didn't think it was going to be that much.
Now, I know what I'm looking at. These are medals from the Korean War, but the key thing to me, which I find very exciting and powerful, is I can see two words that tell a story. We've got the word Yangtze on the bar, and we've got the word amethyst here on the medal.
That's right.
So I know exactly where you are in history, and I can see that these were...
That's
Who
correct.
is Stoker Bannister?
Stoker Bannister was my late father. He was a shipmate of HMS Amethyst in 1949 when he was involved with the Yangtze incident.
Right. Well, we better say what that is. British warship sailing up the Yangtze got involved by mistake in the battles between the Chinese Communists, the People's Liberation Army, and the Chinese Nationalists. And the ship was fired on by the Liberation Army shore batteries and very badly damaged.
Yeah.
And in that attack on the 20th of April 1949, 22 crew members were killed, including the captain.
Yeah.
The ship ran out of control onto a sandbank and in effect was captured by the Chinese. And what happened to your father? Was he part of that?
My father was actually injured in the attack and sustained shrapnel wounds to his chest, and he was part of the crew that tried to escape. But when they got to shore, he was captured by the communists and taken to a village hospital, and they operated on him without anaesthetic because it was a primitive hospital. He was given a piece of wood to hold in his mouth for the pain.
We're back to the Battle of Trafalgar, aren't we, almost?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a real sort of diplomatic incident. A lot of negotiation took,
yes,
but were in effect political prisoners.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, there was a dramatic escape. They changed overnight the profile of the ship with canvas screens, and she slipped away in the dark, following a Chinese liner. And the guns focused on the Chinese liner, which they sank.
That's right.
And the Amethyst then slipped away, and this was on the 31st of July, so 100 days of imprisonment.
100 days, yeah.
And there was then that very famous signal, have rejoined the fleet.
Yeah.
And that was the Amethyst back on service.
Yeah.
So your father then, what, stayed on the ship?
He stayed on the ship and went on to fight in Korea. When he came home, he married my mother, and in the early days of their marriage, they had hard times, and he sold the medals just to keep the wolves from the door, as everybody does. And it was always my boyhood dream to try and get these medals back for him. And I traced them all over the world. and finally found them in the Far East.
I mean, you're incredibly lucky.
Very
because
lucky, yeah.
so many people have lost their family's medals and they've disappeared out into the big wide world. And finding them is extraordinary. And the other thing is, they're still the set. You know, the set could have been broken up because one is much more valuable than the others. So that I have to ask you, obviously, what did you pay?
I was held a ransom, 10,000.
Well, it's not that bad news. I mean, this is an extraordinarily rare group for obvious reasons. The value is probably 6,000 to 8,000, 9,000. So, okay, you paid slightly above the odds, but actually, who cares?
Nobody. No. I don't anyway.
No, I mean, had it been mine, I'd have done it. You know, this is your family story. This is here forever. You've got it.
When I see a rectangular top table like this on cabrel legs, a specialist or people collect furniture, they would know what this is.
Yes.
And you know what it is.
Yes.
And what is it?
I think it's properly called an arrow silver table.
Right. The silver table was initially used for displaying your silver on teapot, tea caddies, sat on the table, and then the lady or gentleman then would take tea from this dish top.
Right. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And that's clever and difficult cabinet making, to have this one piece of solid timber and have that dish top. The date of this, I would date this around George II, so it's about 1740.
That's what I thought.
Made of quality mahogany, and on the top of the cabriolet leg you have this long, elongated C scroll. The pad foot, then you have these almost like little socks.
Yes, that's
nice
right.
little feature. You know, I've seen that on other Irish pieces of furniture. So where do you keep this?
It's kept in our drawing room.
Yeah. Adorned with silver?
Yes.
Lovely.
Yes.
And how long have you had it in the family?
The first knowledge I have, it belonged to my grandparents, and it eventually came to me. Where they got it from, I just don't know.
When you received it from your grandparents, what condition was it in?
It was not as good condition as that. It had been used to serve food from. It was a bit distressed, maybe.
Because to me, when I see silver tables, Irish silver tables, they're normally quite black.
Yes, it would have been darker than that. Yeah,
because of the fires, the peat fires, because peat is very sooty, and that's part of its character. And one of the things I would advocate is when you have things restored, have a look at them and think, should this be restored or should this be conserved? And that's the difference. If it would have been conserved, it would have retained some of the traffic and wear and tear, which to me adds to the value. Beautifully restored, but it's been taken right back to the wood. If this was conserved, it would have had a value between 8,000 and 12,000.
Right.
But because of the restoration, it slightly undermined it, so I would put a value of 3,000.
Right. That's interesting.
But nevertheless, it's a genuine piece of furniture.
Thank you very much.
This is one of my favourite toys because not only is it a plaything, but it also incorporates technology. Here's this little clown figure sitting at his easel, and you just turn the handle at the back and he'll do, magically, a portrait. But not only that, you can take out the can below, put a new one in, and he'll do another portrait.
Good.
And again, and again, and again. And I think this was really unique for a toy of this period.
Good.
Made in Germany, in Berlin, by Philip Vielmetter in about 1875. How long have you had it?
Since about 2004, but I reckon my dad's had it since 1920s, 30s.
Did he play with it? Was this
I don't think so, because shortly before he died, we were talking about property in the house, and he said now there'll be a box with a tin toy in it. Just be very careful with it. And I think that's the reason why, when we were children, obviously we were never allowed to play with it.
Oh, what a shame.
I know, and it's been in the box all that time. And it's only when he died, unfortunately, I opened the box, the magic box, and I was playing with it, and I did get some of the little drawings done.
Well, I'm glad you did. This is a bit like a cookery programme, because here are some of the drawings we did earlier.
I was fascinated, really was.
And it's very topical. Wilhelm II, the Kaiser, the hen, the punch, and finally Umberto, who was the Italian
He was
premier.
the Italian one,
Yeah. Well, it's an exotic toy. It's got its original box.
Yes,
and it's
indeed.
quite rare to have all 5 cams. So a nice thing.
Right,
and I'm
that's
delighted
good.
you had a chance to play with it.
Oh, I did. I was fascinated. I just couldn't believe it.
It still works, although a bit slower these
Yeah,
days.
I know.
Like
I
us
know.
all.
Like us
Get
all.
on.
Getting on a bit.
Getting on a bit. One was sold at auction not so long ago, in fact only last week in the States, and made over $5,000.
Oh, my heavens.
So converting that to pounds, I think today at auction, certainly £3,500 to £5,000.
Goodness, I wasn't expecting that. Wow.
Do you know, you wait years for the Roadshow to come back to Northern Ireland. The best thing you can bring me is a mouldy old bit of wood. Do you know what? I love you for it. Tell me what you like about it.
Well, what I like about it is it's allegedly an original water pipe. I work for Belfast Charter, and from 1790 it brought water into Belfast.
As soon as I saw it, I mean, I grew up just outside Tipperary. And in the 70s, it was constantly hassle with getting water, the pipes would freeze, pressure was never good. And this is where it all began. Every civilization going back to Dot has been obsessed with getting clean water in, 'cause that stops disease and gives you something fresh to drink. And it's a little known fact that a city like Belfast was pretty much one of the first at putting in a clean water system. Obviously, at this period, you didn't have the metals and the plastics and the ceramics that you needed. So they thought, what will we do? And they would hollow out a tree section, usually an elm, and they would leave the bark on. You'd have a male and female part, bolt these together. And it actually worked pretty well. And if you look, because once the wood is underground and it's kept constantly wet, it starts to break down, and that's what gives this amazing finish to it. It never would have started. It's all rotting and hardening and then cleaning and preserving. And that's why I love it so much now. Is not only is it historically interesting, it becomes its own work of art. If I could have anything, just as a piece of history, this is it for me. It's very exciting. It's not worth a great deal. It's probably £200 or something around that sort of figure. But thank you, you've made my day.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
No surrender, the rallying cry of the Unionists here in Northern Ireland. How do you come to have a glass with that written on?
Well, the grandfather was in the Orange Order for a good number of years, and he was made Grand Master. Then, after he died, it was handed down through the family.
And of course, no surrender came from the Siege of Derry, 1688 to 1689, where you had forces loyal to James II. Besieging people in the city of Derry who were loyal to King William, who had ousted James, William being Protestant, James being Catholic. And the rallying cry of those loyal to the Protestant King William within the blockaded walls of Derry was
no surrender.
No surrender. And from then, so familiar with.
That's right.
This is, of course, in many ways, a very politically charged item.
You know, 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have dreamt of even bringing it here, you know. But now things have totally changed, you know. People from other sections of the community quite like to see memorabilia from a different side, a different perspective.
It's something that we can learn about as a historical artefact, rather than something that has perhaps, certainly for some here in Northern Ireland, a toxic legacy from the past.
Exactly.
The divides are breaking down, people are learning about each other's cultures.
That's what I think, like, you know.
I talked to our glass expert Andy McConnell about this. Now, the Siege of Derry, 1688 to 1689. This dates from more like the 1880s, made in France. Now, I asked Andy about its value. I'm sure you'd like to know. Without this inscription, 15 quid maybe. It's a glass for a pub. It's a drinking glass. With that inscription, more like £100.
Well, it's not about the value. The value doesn't interest me, if you know what I mean. Like, I'll keep it, you know, for a number of years, and then it'll go into the Orange Museum in Loughgall. Really, the origin of it all, you know.
Well, that's a lovely idea. You're going to put it in the museum. Thank you for bringing it along.
Thanks very much for giving you a bit of your time, you know.
I have to say, I have never seen Chinese paintings like this before. They're family paintings.
Our grandfather, Jim Maltz, said
served in the Chinese Labour Corps between 1917 and 1919.
The Chinese Labour Corps.
They essentially cleared up the mess after World War I, laying roads, laying railway tracks, clearing up all the detritus of battle, including very unpleasantly the bodies, and were involved in the war cemetery creation.
Yeah. Did your grandfather ever speak to you about what he did with his Chinese Labour Corps?
No, actually our grandfather never spoke about the war. He was wounded in the Battle of the Somme, so I think he just didn't like to discuss the war. After he was wounded, he wanted to go back in, but he wasn't fit enough to go back into active service. So he requested to go into the Corps, and he picked the Chinese Labour Corps, being interested in the Chinese for some reason.
Why was he interested in the Chinese?
I don't know, but he seemed to have been fascinated with the Chinese.
Yeah.
I mean, he wrote diaries, and from the diaries, reading through them, we know how much he loved the Chinese and their culture.
He would have appreciated these.
Very much so.
To him, just before he left, took him home in 1919. It was presented to him by his Chinese Labour Corps, 500 men.
Your grandfather was clearly a highly valued and beloved person, I guess, and one can see this from these panels. The common denominator is that in the bottom left-hand corner of each, we have a very European-looking gentleman in a rickshaw here and standing with a Chinese lady on his arm here. I'm assuming that this is your grandfather.
Yes.
It is.
It is.
It is, yes.
Very proud to say it is, yes.
Here along the top, we've got Buddhistic lions, we've got lucky bats flying through the clouds, all Chinese symbols. What about this? Have you ever thought about that?
No.
I'm going to suggest this looks like a shop sign with a pearl, the sign of triumph or victory. And this, I think this is the Christian dove of peace, which makes sense because this building is utterly un-Chinese. It's a church spire. I imagine that these were presented to him after the whole sorry affair was over.
Yes, yes.
I've never seen panels like this before. Seeing this divided into four made me realize that what they've done is they've screened from home, and they've decided that they're going to make another fourfold screen, and they're going to paint little bits of European details on a traditional Chinese fourfold screen. You've got little bits of Chinese furniture that are recognizable, but then threading its way through two of the central panels, you've got electricity on poles. It's an extraordinary mixture. The word unique is overused, but I have to say in all the years I've been doing the show, I haven't seen anything like this. And of course they are unique to a moment in military history when a whole group of people brought from outside the conflict all together, brought in to clear up the mess. How do you put a value on something like this? These are museum objects. £5,000-10,000? I just don't know. I would prefer to say priceless, the old get out. Wonderful things. Thank you so much for bringing them in.
Thank you for telling us about it.
What I love about your figures is that they've still got these original liners. They're almost always missing. What do you know about them?
Very little. They were bought by my late brother-in-law, and they have been in the house on display as long as I can remember. But I don't know where they came from. My sister would have brought them, but she's not sufficiently mobile, so I have brought them on her behalf.
Well, the mark on the bottom tells me everything I need to know.
Yes.
And there underneath is the factory mark of Royal Worcester.
Yes.
So they're Worcester figures.
Worcester figures.
And they have around the mark a date code.
Yes.
When I was little, my father sat me in the corner and wouldn't let me out until I could recite all my Worcester year codes.
Yes.
So I've never forgotten them. So I can count the little dots there. You've got 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 19 dots. That's 1910.
Yes.
So that's the year they were made.
I'll try to remember that, yes.
And so Royal Worcester, made in 1910, and they're known as the Eastern Water Carrier.
Yes.
And they're by James Hadley, a great modeller.
Yes, yes, I've heard the name right enough, yes.
He was superb.
Yes.
It's just the detail.
Yes, indeed.
Every little finger all the fingernails, the modelling, that's a real hand in tiny size, isn't it?
It is indeed.
And in this case, the gilding is outstanding.
Isn't it?
I mean, if you ever run your fingers across that gold, raised up gold.
It is.
And that takes an awful lot of time to do because you have to build up layer upon layer of enamel on the porcelain, firing it each time, and then you put the gold on the top. And that takes an awful long time.
Yes.
So the figures were made in fair numbers, but I've never seen a pair decorated so well. With their original liners fitting inside so nice. So let's think what they're worth. A beautiful pair, £1,000.
My, I had no idea. Caroline will be delighted.
Stately, plump Buck Mulligan came from the stairhead bearing a bowl of lather on which a mirror and a razor lay crossed. Ulysses.
Yes.
By James Joyce.
Yes.
Published in Paris in 1922. One of the greatest novels by an Irishman.
Yes.
Have you read it?
I can barely spell it.
I have read it, but I confess I've done it in chunks. Anyone else read it?
No other volunteers?
It's a tremendously important novel. It's really a novel that threw the whole idea of the novel up in the air. Let it just come crashing down in pieces on forward. Some of it's incredibly hard to read, some of it's hilarious, some of it's frankly unreadable. And that's kind of the point. It makes us think about what a novel really is.
Yes.
And rightly, it is regarded as a watershed book.
Yeah.
Where did you get it from?
My father bought it at an auction in North Belfast in around 1984-85.
Right. Not even a book auction, it was a general.
Just general auction.
Right, I see.
Yes. I was with a few other books at the time.
Right.
But
do you mind me asking what was paid for it at that time?
The lot cost £30.
£30, okay. Well, it's a complicated book, written by an Irishman, but published in Paris, on the continent.
Yes.
For censorship reasons. And Parisian publishers, very smart, knew that people don't just buy books to read. And they would often issue a first edition of a book in several formats.
Yes.
A limited edition, perhaps a very limited edition,
yes.
and then an ordinary copy for you and I,
General.
I guess. And they found that was a way of garnering interest in books and actually selling more copies in the long run. Now, if I look at the limitation notice in this copy, the publisher, Shakespeare and Company, at Sylvia Beach in Paris, issued this edition, and it was limited to 1,000 copies. Furthermore, 100 Dutch handmade paper. Now, they're the really posh copies and would have been the expensive copies at the time. Then, 150 copies on verger d'arche, an elaborate paper, a very nice, costly paper.
Yes.
And that's what we're looking at here. We're looking at one of the 150 copies printed on verger d'arche, and you can feel the quality of that paper. And then, after that, 750 copies just on handmade paper were made, and they were the standard copies for everybody. And clearly their marketing technique worked because the entire edition was sold out within a month.
This copy has never been read.
Someone else fell at the first hurdle.
It has been unopened. And
so we can see that here, that the tops of many of the pages are still joined together.
Yes.
Because books are made up of gatherings of folded paper.
Yes.
And until somebody came along and cut those top edges, they would remain closed up like this.
Yes.
And flicking through this, it looks like the entire book is unopened.
Yes.
Collectors like that, I think.
Yes, it makes it a wee bit more special, I think.
Well, I like to know that somebody's read a book, of course, but also my bibliophile's brain is saying, wow, this is an unopened copy.
Yes.
What fun. So, simply put, there are three bands. There are the 750 copies, yes, desirable, and valuable.
Yes.
Probably at auction you might. Then at the very top end you've got the super rare copies signed by James Joyce. You know, a really good copy of that, you could be pushing £100,000. You're in the middle here.
Yes.
I'm going to put £18,000 to £20,000 on this.
It's a good investment for £30.
You said it. It certainly was, yes. And it's a wonderful thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick.
Here comes the Sheriff of Belfast City. Yahoo!
This is so tactile. It's really nice. So why did you bring this pebble in to show me?
Well, it's actually my mum's, and we have it for years in the family. My dad found it when he was a boy out in the fields.
But it's a Neolithic stone axe. It's 2,500 to 4,000 BC. That is approaching 6,000 years old. It's not really about the value.
No.
Because they're invaluable, really. But 2.5 to 400 pounds?
It's history.
It's more than history.
An initial S on there. That's for present to my grandfather and grandmother. They got married back in 1933. The ribbon round it that's the way they came packaged.
Isn't that amazing? You so rarely see that. But I'm tempted to look at one of them, but I don't know. What do you think? Should we leave it? I think we should leave it.
I wouldn't like to untie them just because they've been tied for so long.
No. I would keep the tradition going.
Keep the tradition going. It seems a shame to use them now that they've sat like that.
The flatware service that you're not to use.
Yes, for display purposes only.
That's absolutely wonderful. They are, of course, silver, early 1930s, and value, I think we're looking at easily £1,000.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed.
So we have here a Regency table clock from around 1830 by a man called Harris, Clement Harris, and it's signed Cornhill, which is in the City of London. So what's a clock from London doing in Belfast?
The family did have houses throughout the UK, okay. So possibly might have went to Devon, somewhere like that. As I say, it's been in the family, it's come into my hand the last 4 weeks.
Do you like it? And why do you like it?
I like it as an antique, but I don't like it for my own personal.
But it's interesting you say that, because the veneer on this case is satinwood, and satinwood is actually quite an unpopular veneer at the moment. I've never really understood why, but in the last 5 years or so, satinwood furniture has dropped away a bit. And it's sad, because although you can't see it here, if this was given a good waxing, the colour goes bright out to you. Really? Yeah, it looks fantastic. There are some features on this clock which are very sweet. For example, set into the top here is this recessed handle, which is a lovely, neat little feature. Handles are a bit of a problem with table clocks because they're either on the side or there's a stocking grey handle on top. But when you can neatly fold away the handle, sure, it gives the clock case much better proportion. Collectors like that little feature. The other thing is that the proportions of the case are correct. It's a smallish clock. It's, 10 inches high or so. It's got nice ripple mouldings to the top. It's even got satinwood little bun feet. It's slightly falling apart, which is rather fun, but that's what collectors like to see. It's glazed on the two sides with these beveled lead glass windows, so you can see inside the movement. The movement is nothing special, but it's an English movement period to the case of around 1835, that sort of period. Okay. And it adds up to a really collectible, not going to set the world alight, yeah, sure, but it is quite commercial. And in these days when clocks are suffering a little bit, this is the sort of thing that sell. At auction today, between £1,500 and £2,000.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that sort of figure.
Quite happy with that.
You're going to flog it now, aren't you?
We'll go out for dinner. Thank you very much indeed.
It's my pleasure.
So when I heard we were coming to Belfast, I was expecting to see a work by William Connor. What I wasn't expecting to see was a collection of 11. What is the story here?
My father was a relative of William Connor, but also a very good friend. He looked after him as William Connor got older, and William gave a lot of these paintings to him. Once my father died, then they passed to my mother, and from her to the three of us.
So then when they passed to you, what did you do with them?
We put them in the loft.
In the loft?
In the loft, and that's where they have sat ever since. Because we have a problem, we can't divide them into 3 lots.
I see. So here is the problem.
Here's the problem, yes.
So you've come here today to basically get some sort of guidance.
To get advice where we should go from here.
Sure. Well, yeah, I can tell you that the loft isn't normally where we advise people to keep their paint. I think it can be quite straightforward to remove, but even so, best to sort the sooner rather than later and yes, to get them out of there.
Yes.
So let's talk a bit about the artist.
Yes.
He was a Belfast-born painter.
That's right.
The son of an iron worker.
Yes.
And really what he's best known are for his scenes and depictions of working life in the city.
Very much so.
And so I've picked 3 out here, which are my personal favourites. This bottom one, we can see a little sort of man on his cart. I mean, this, for me, is what Connor was all about. I mean, this is that glimpse back into time, isn't it? This is how life was in Belfast around 1920, I would say.
Okay.
And this is a watercolour and ink on paper. The work at the top, I'd think, is probably, well, in fact, it's dated. This one's 1908. Now, this is a theme which he repeated a number of times, and they're often of this sort of similar size scale of women wearing shawls. And the reason they were quite small is because they were painted in situ. I mean, he'd rarely leave the house without his sketchbook in his pocket, and he'd sort of jot these things down when he sort of saw them, the happenings of life in Belfast. So they're really, really nice things. This one over here is slightly more substantial. This is far more typical of Connor's studies of individual or grouped figures in interior spaces. This work isn't dated.
No.
It looks like they're sort of winding wool. I mean, if you looked at this...
I thought it was embroidery.
Embroidery?
I thought that was what they were doing, yes.
Yeah. But it's a really nice image, and that's typical of his sort of style of work and crown. They look almost sort of lithographic in appearance. Out of this collection, which are your favourite pictures?
Well, my main favourite is the 2 ladies embroidering.
Which are your favourite
Well, my
pictures?
favourite is the 4 girls. I just love the expression on their faces. It just catches a moment, you know, where they're 4 of them having a bit of crack, as we would say.
Yeah.
I just love it.
Now, you want to know, obviously, values.
Yep.
It varies considerably with Connor. It is also worth pointing out that the market 10 years ago was certainly stronger than it is today, although the market is recovering. So I think a work such as this one, the top row of the lady wearing the shawl, I think it is sort of worth somewhere in the region of £1,000.
Okay, yeah.
I think the one below, slightly more, £1,000 to £1,500 perhaps. This one, however, I think is worth £1,000.
Right, okay.
If I give you an idea of the value of the collection as a whole, I think it's probably sort of somewhere in the region of £20,000.
Okay, yes.
Has this made it any easier at all?
No, sorry. I'm still not sure what we're going to do with them.
How about rotating them between houses?
Yes, that's an idea. Something worth talking about.
Yes, indeed.
Whatever you decide to do with them, just don't leave them in the loft.
No.
Right, we will do that. We will take that advice on board.
See, when you look at a case like this, you sort of think you're going to be in for a pair of fish servers or something useless, but that really isn't the case. These are really quite beautiful, in fact. How do you know them?
Well, my mother gave them to me about 20 years ago. When they used to come back from leave in Hong Kong, they used to like to go to Dublin and shop for silver and antiques.
Yeah, I see. They were bought from Weir & Sons, who are on Grafton Street, Dublin, and here in Belfast.
And they're still there.
They're still there. How lovely is that? So what we're talking about is a set of liqueur glasses that look like that. Solid silver applied onto handmade glass.
Right.
And has anybody here got any idea as to how it did? Anybody got a clue?
Painted, like built up on it?
Painting is involved. It was a painting on a substance my mum used to use on me, which was an attractive substance. Unfortunately, with me, it completely failed. But on this, what they did is they painted on a substance that conducted electricity. And what they did is they painted on this goo, and then they put a clip on that and put it in a tank, like a square goldfish bowl. And it looked like it kind of got this yellow liquid in it. I won't say what it kind of looked like, but you get the general idea. And at the other end of the tank, there would be silver. And there was an electric wire connected between the two, and then the power was turned on, and this made the silver break off and plate the glass. That's the way this is done. I think these are about 1930s. I think they're really pretty. Do you use them at all, or have they always lived in the box?
They're in the box, I'm afraid.
Lived in the box. Isn't that a shame? Unfortunately, there's a casualty. I mean, obviously, one wild party too many, and it's broken the glass in two. But they are absolutely gorgeous. And what are we going to put on those? 25 quid each, sort of best part of 150 quid. And, you know, as I say to her, do you ever drink kind of after dinner liqueurs or anything like that?
Never.
Well, it's absolutely useless for Irish wine, isn't it? I mean, really, I don't think we'll be using this for wine.
"25,000 mourners came to Stormont in 2005 to commemorate the life of one of the greatest sons of Belfast, George Best. When did you first discover the amazing George Best?
I was a small boy and I saw him on television. I just thought he was fantastic player.
Yeah. We're of a similar age, I think, and I collected football cards and sort of little commercial cards, and George Best was always the one we all wanted.
Yeah.
So found obviously fame with Manchester United, later on for Northern Ireland. But, you know, your collection here is a side of George Best which I certainly knew very little about, and that is his interest in the world of fashion.
I think as an apprentice he had an ambition to open a shop. He wanted to open a couple of boutiques.
Really?
And he did open those at quite a young age. And then he had contracts with clothing companies, and he got quite involved and was enthusiastic about the design of his clothing.
Dressed guy.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking to the left, these sort of jackets, were both of those worn by George Best?
They were modelled by him,
Modelled
yeah.
by
And I
him.
think he would have worn them out casually, yes. He used to wear his own range.
I really speak of the late 60s, sort of early 70s.
That's correct, yeah.
And certainly as a little boy I was aware of these amazing colours and, you know, a hangover really from the psychedelic days. I mean, look at that.
Yeah.
So, and this shirt.
Certainly,
That's absolutely incredible. But these shoes, which, you know, they're made of plastic, they're kind of cool looking. George Best actually moulded into the soul.
Right, yeah.
And I mean, where do you get these things from? I mean, they've got to be rare to start with. They're throwaways, aren't they? The actual displays.
Yeah. They're just hunting, really. Just the toy fairs, classified ads, auctions, internet, all over, really. They come from all different sources.
Well, one remarkable item you brought along is actually a ripped black shirt. Tell me, you know, where did you get it and how do we know that this is associated with George Best?
Well, that came from his publicity company. He opened a supermarket in Dublin, and when he arrived, there were thousands of screaming, very enthusiastic fans, and they tried to tear the shirt off his back. Acquired that on the internet. That was 666.
607?
Yeah, I remember
the number
that.
of the beast.
Yeah.
My goodness. Now, I also noticed he did a range of ties.
Yes.
A pair of slippers.
Bedroom slippers, yes.
I mean, it's incredible. You know, George Best.
He did so many things.
So many things.
So many.
He moved from the realm of a young, fairly innocent man training to play for a big club. Successfully played and became really the first superstar.
That's correct. Yeah.
You know, he was a very good-looking guy. He you know, played hard. He liked to enjoy himself afterwards. To me, this shirt kind of says it all.
Yeah.
You know. Well, we've got to talk values. I mean, a display like this is probably almost unique. I mean, I think this alone would probably be worth around £1,000. This display here with a pair of boots, the like of which I wore when I was playing for my village football team in the 60s, I would imagine that's probably worth at least £1,000 to £1,500. We're looking just with this group of items as a total of perhaps £25,000. But is this all you have? Or?
It's just part of the collection. I have quite a bit more.
Yeah. So what? 10 times this amount?
Getting on for that, yeah.
10 times 25,000 is £250,000. So you've got an exceptionally unusual and very valuable collection. And I think it's very poignant that we can record this here, where George Best's funeral took place in the Grand Hall just behind us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And that's a reminder of just one historic event that took place here back in 2005. And we've been delighted to welcome visitors here to Stormont today. If you do an Antiques Roadshow in Belfast, it's a fair bet that you'll see some items associated with the Titanic. And lots of people have brought along all sorts of ephemera connected with the sinking of that great ship all those years ago. This is one of them, handkerchief, with some details of the sinking of the ship. And what this is an example of is the industry that sprang up in Belfast, a city in mourning, but nonetheless a city that was thirsty for knowledge of what happened that night and to all the people on board. For the Antiques Roadshow, until next time.